Good afternoon, and welcome to our April installation of On the Mark, our virtual event series that helps to connect BECMA members to policy makers and doers and practitioners in our community on topical events that are important for the growth and sustaining of our businesses. My name is Shagun Idowu. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of BECMA, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, which serves as the chief advocate and chamber of commerce for Black businesses across Massachusetts. And we are proud to represent the over 2,000 Black firms that employ 17,000 Massachusetts residents, that generate a revenue of $1.9 billion and pay out almost $600 million a year in payroll and benefits. Always important to us to lift up the importance and impact of our businesses and entrepreneurs like you. Today's conversation is around partnerships, and this is especially an especially important topic for me personally, because I know that all of the success that BECMA can boast today is the result of partnerships. We have not done any of this work alone, especially coming from a community that has always worked together to achieve all of the accomplishments that we can name. When I think of some of those accomplishments that BECMA has achieved through these partnerships, I think of just the last year alone of how we would not have made it through COVID-19 without our strong partnerships and allies with organizations like the Foundation for Business Equity, Commonwealth Kitchen, Amplify Latinx, LISC Boston, and the list goes on and on. I think of the Futures Fund that we established at Berkshire Bank with Malia Lazu and the Mass LGBT Chamber of Commerce that extended a line of credit to all of you in a time of need. I think of the Equitable PPP Access Initiative Partnership that helped to connect over 600 businesses owned by people of color to $9 million worth of the Paycheck Protection Program loan. I think of our Protect MA initiative that allowed us to not only ensure through our partnerships that we were able to get over 10,000 masks to residents in need, but to ensure that we were connecting our businesses to commerce opportunities when things got dire. And finally, I think of all of the achievements we made at the state level, working with Governor Baker to enact policies that would create more access to contract opportunities, as well as making some administrative changes that none of which would have been possible without our strong partnerships. I'm grateful to Kelley Chunn, who is one of our strongest and most dedicated members here at BECMA, as well as those at Denterlein who have joined us today for this really important discussion. And we know that you're going to take away a lot from this conversation about why partnerships are important for your business and for your venture. Finally, I'll end with this. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't share a proverb or two with those that I'm speaking with. And I'm reminded of an Ethiopian proverb that says that when spiders unite, they can tie down any lion. And as we think of all of the massive hurdles that we have facing us now, not just the equitable economic recovery in a post-COVID reality, which is coming up very swiftly, but also thinking of how we close the yawning racial wealth gap and ensure that we're preparing our communities for the future of work. We will only achieve an equitable reality here in the Commonwealth through strong partnerships. And so with that, I turn the conversation over to Kelley and our friends at Denterlein, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Segun. And pleasure to be joining Geri in this conversation and Jada Leader Lewis. I'm reminded before we get into the conversation, since we're doing proverbs and sayings, there is an African saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think that has been one of the themes of our partnership.
Kelley, that's nicely said. Before we get started, I just want to thank BECMA and Shagun for the leadership that you have shown in the work that you do, supporting not just the businesses that are owned by Black and Brown and but also for all of us. You are a great reminder of the importance of working together. And Kelley and I have tried to manifest that spirit in the work that we do together. And Jada is a member of my team, and by extension, really has helped both me and Kelley support the work that we do on behalf of clients, and is a leader in her own right, having participated in so many of the important issues of the day, and serves with me on the board of Boston Main Streets, which is an important way to connect with the communities that are doing the life-giving work of during this pandemic of providing food and coffee and barbershops. So we just feel really committed to Boston and committed to the work that together we're doing, and supported by BECMA and the organizations like BECMA. Thank you so much, Shagun. Jada, I don't know if you want to take us away.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here and to moderate this discussion. I'm Jada Leader-Louise. I'm a vice president at Geri Denterlein's firm, and Kelley Chunn is a strategic partner with us, and a fabulous PR mastermind in her own right. Kelley, I was hoping we could start with you and take it all the way to the beginning. You are a lifelong Bostonian, and you've had your practice now for a couple of decades, and your work has taken you everywhere to Nigeria and the White House. Can you tell us a bit about how you got started, and really where your focus has been for these last few years?
How much time do we have?
Never enough.
Almost a lifelong Bostonian, a child of the Great Migration. I've been in Boston since I was 4. But I think the story that our audience, welcome audience, wants to hear is how I got started in business. And here is where the paths for Geri and myself converge. I think I know that I was very mission driven because I came out of TV news and public affairs, which is very issue oriented. It's all about causes in addition to spectacular fires. So that attention to issues, being kind of mission driven, are really what prompted me to go into business, into the consulting business for myself, along with, you mentioned Nigeria, having the experience of living in a very entrepreneurial West African country. I think some of that really rubbed off on me because I come from a family with a strong work ethic, but I don't come from an entrepreneurial family, so to speak. So I think that the combination of being mission driven, caring about social change, caring about social issues, working in the news business, and wanting to have a place and a space of my own, so to speak, where I could work, they all combined to create a consulting practice. And that kind of grew out of also working for the state on the issue of affordable, I have to put that in quotes, housing, for mass housing, and being able to teach at Northeastern, and moonlighting. A tip for those of you who are thinking, how do I go into business? Moonlighting, side hustle as they call it today. So teaching during the day and collaborating with a team of like-minded communicators in the evening are what really started me on my path to consulting.
Kelley, I'm so glad you brought up your state government and TV experience, something that Geri also shares. Geri, can you share a bit about how you got started and what your journey's been?
Kelley and I share an activist heart, which we'll talk more about as we go on, which is part of the glue that keeps our partnership strong. We share these values and the spirit of social justice. My line of work has always been communications. I was a press secretary for Governor Dukakis in his press office back in the day, then went to WBZ TV, spent 10 years there, started consulting, have had my own business, communications for 21 years. We're a full service agency. But early on, that spirit of activism and social justice drove me. I was an organizer for the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez movement. I took a year right out of high school to work what would, now be called a gap year, I guess. But it was a very informative year for me. And then understanding, moving here to Boston as a young woman, understanding the culture here and how much the whole issue of communities was very important in a good way. You know, we think of right now in this time of racial unrest, we think of the things that divide us with races and communities. But to me, it was what united Boston in an interesting way. It was post-busing when I arrived in the early 80s. And I felt as though Boston had these enclaves of neighborhoods, certainly familiar to me, the Irish and the Italian North End. But once you get to know Boston, you see the other cultural aspects of it in the community. And so I dove in pretty quickly in understanding that, and really came to love my adopted hometown. I feel like I have the zeal of a convert. Everything about Boston, even its challenges and its troubles, inspires me to want to make it as good a city as I feel it really has the potential to be.
And that neighborhood connection is something I value so much, both in our Main Streets work, but then in the work that we do with our clients. Kelley and Geri, when we talk about our partnership and we market ourselves as a partnership, we use this uptown downtown strategy language.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that and maybe how you even came up with it?
Well, that's kind of evolved from the strengths that we each brought to the table. I guess it was some 10 odd years ago when Geri and I had our first conversation about, you know, what a partnership might look like. But I'm steeped in the nonprofit world, have worked with a lot of the neighborhood and community-based organizations all over town, but primarily in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. But even clients that I had, like the Department of Public Health, and much later on, as a consultant, mass housing, those projects took me to the neighborhoods and focused on audiences that typically are underserved, audiences of color. So that was the strength that I brought to the table. And growing up in Boston, uptown was always the neighborhoods, and you know, downtown was, you know, the kind of the large business district downtown, unless we were talking about Down Dudley, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I had this sense when Kelley and I started our conversation 10 years ago that we would be a good match for a couple of reasons. Kelley had such deep roots into the neighborhoods in terms of the community organizations, the housing issues, the educational issues that we were all as an agency involved with, because our platform is issues management. So of course, healthcare, education, transportation, those were the issues that we have really always been strongly associated with as an agency. And yet those roots in the neighborhood and the impact to neighborhood was not as fresh to us as a downtown agency. We're in the financial district. And Kelley and I talked over lunch one day about what I thought could be a really good partnership, and that I thought that it could extend our communications work into the neighborhoods in a very important way, and that we could hear the real authentic voices from the neighborhoods that would inform our work, so that when we're talking about public policy issues, we would have a reality check in so many ways. And of course, while Kelley and I share a lot of relationships, both in the business sector and the civic sector, there were relationships that she had that I did not enjoy, and vice versa. So it became a very complementary type of relationship that has evolved over these last 10 years, and some challenges along the way. I'm not going to lie, some challenges along the way, especially in the last year and a half with the real intensity around the racial divide and the racial reckoning. So we've really had to kind of work things and change things along the way, which I think is instructive for any business partnerships, that you have to be open to change, not just in yourselves, but change in the atmosphere that's going to force changes on you. So there's a lot of learning, and your antenna have to be always up in a partnership, or else you can lose it pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's definitely been an evolution, and to the point where we found that at some points, because we each have our own practices, I'm a sole proprietor. I've always worked collaboratively to get the job done. Geri has a firm. But when we found out that we were competing for some of the same clients, we were like, whoa, Nellie, how can we, going beyond, the term they call frenemies, which I've never really considered you to be, Geri. But, when you're competing for the same business, it's kind of like, well, we're collaborating already. So how can we make that collaboration even stronger so each one of us can benefit? So I think that was kind of a wake-up call for both of us.
So as you collaborate on projects, you're presenting yourselves to potential clients. How do you structure it? You've talked about the evolution of your partnership a bit, but what does that look like from the business mindset?
Well, go ahead, Geri. Looks like you want to say something.
No, I think the question is both from the client perspective and about our perspective, right, Kelley?
Yes.
So, maybe you've talked a lot about our perspective as collaborators. Why don't you take that, and I'll take maybe the client side.
Well, as collaborators, I think you have to start with, and we've talked about this, shared values. Knowing who I am, Geri knowing who she is, and knowing who we are when we collaborate, and that starts with literally being on the same page. And in our case, it's an MOU. It's a memorandum of understanding that grows out of things like when am I going to take the lead on a project? When is Denterlein going to take the lead on a project? And that's something that usually has to be negotiated, based on the project itself, how we present ourselves to the client, and some of that has to do with equity. And how you're going to share in the proceeds of the contract once you get it. And that has evolved over time. So having its values, it's knowing which role you're going to play, whether you're going to be the lead and drive the account and the, first things first, drive the proposal process, and then lead the account and negotiating that. And that really comes out of the relationship that you have. I forgot trust. I mean, you really, you're kind of dating, so to speak, before you join forces to see if this is going to work. Maybe you work on a sample project to see, how that's gonna work out for each one of the parties. You come to an agreement about the roles, about the scope. And then you take it from there. Geri?
Well, Kelley, you packed a lot of good information on that. So I'm just going to underscore a couple of points for those of you in the audience who might.
And from the client's perspective too. Yeah.
Yes, maybe thinking about partnerships and thinking about how you join forces to the best advantage. From the client perspective, our experience is the clients want to feel like it's seamless. They don't want to worry about, oh my gosh, do I have two people? They're doing quote a joint venture, and how does that work? And do I have to worry about it? No. So Kelley and I decide beforehand who's going to be the lead, both in terms of the fiduciary sense, who's going to actually get the bill under her name, and then who's the client going to think of as the lead partner, so to speak. So there's a client side, but going into a piece of business, a pitch, I think there's a dubiety about whether or not a joint venture will work. So you've got to prove right away that it's seamless. And we work hard at that, about presenting ourselves as a strategic partnership that is seamless, and and our history helps us with that, because it truly is a long history. But if you don't have that history, you've got to talk it through beforehand and understand that the client will be worried about that. So, so that's something. And also, I think what Kelley mentioned, the MOU, we had a formal memorandum of understanding from the outset. It over time became more formal, and it had more substance behind it, because we were finding, especially lately, meaning in the last 2 years, that we weren't driving our partnership hard enough. We weren't focused on it as aggressively as we should be. It wasn't as top of mind. So we shifted the MOU over time. So it's important, I think, to have a formal sense of what the partnership means in terms of time, in terms of contribution, and also in terms of, as Kelley said, the financial proceeds, how you were going to divide each account. And you won't always know at the outset how you're going to divide it, but you need to have a process written in as to how you will talk about the dividing the proceeds, because in the end, money matters. And people want to be treated fairly in a partnership.
Exactly.
So those are all things that we started out with, but we got better over time.
Right. Definitely an evolution.
Yeah.
And Kelley, you have Kelley Chunn Associates. It's right there in the name, small by design with lots of collaborators. And I would imagine that the Denterlein partnership that you have may look like some of the other partnerships, but that they come in so many different models. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I would say that the partnership with the Denterlein team is unique. In several different ways in our history, in the way that we collaborate on projects, in the fact that it's a firm, and finding out how I fit in. And that has been a process too, the process of fitting in and belonging to a certain extent, feeling like I belong as part of the team. That has been a process. With other collaborations, they're usually with other sole proprietors. So, for example, before she blew up, I had a fantastic partnership with Aqua Homes. Some of you may be familiar with her art. She's kind of a triple threat. She's a fine artist. She's a graphic artist. She does sunflowers. So she did my logo, like 30 years ago or something?
Oh my gosh.
And we worked on all kinds of projects. We did a great project way back in the day for P&G, for their United Way campaign. And, I would call on her if I needed a really good graphics person who I knew would come through for me. There are other projects that I've worked on that have required a videographer or a co-event planner. So those are partnerships that kind of grew out of the needs of the client, and knowing that I had a pool of fellow sole proprietors, independent contractors, if you will, who I had a relationship with, who I trusted to get the job done. Are you going to show up? Are you going to answer my calls or my emails? Are you going to, be responsive to the needs of the client? So I had a team of photographers of about 10 people who I could call on to serve the needs of the client. And sometimes that worked both ways, where they might need something in terms of my own skill set, and then I would contribute to their project. And that's really how I got started as a collaborator back in the 90s with the state's first anti-smoking campaign, and teaching at Northeastern. And I was like, well, how am I going to bid on this? So I basically reached out to people, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't. I've been certified by the state as a women and minority, even though I hate that word, BIPOC person of color. And I literally went down some of the lists of people who I felt would comprise a team. And so there were like 8 or 9 of us. There were Nigerians, there were African Americans, there was a Hawaiian, there was a Jewish woman. We all showed up to bid on the project. And we looked like the United Nations walking in. Some of the people I knew, the camera people I had worked with at, the TV stations, some of the people I had just started a working relationship with, and there was some drama on the team. There was some racial issues that emerged during the team, during our working together. But the point being, I've always worked collaboratively because that was the way to get the job done.
Well, and in terms of partnerships, I think that Kelley's experience with collaboration was really helpful to me to bring in when the occasion was called for, bring in different talent, people of color, now called the BIPOC community. Because part of the issue when I started my business in 2000, of course, you start hiring. When we built out a full service agency, so we have 20 to 25 people at any given time on staff at all different levels. And you tend to, when you start out in business, hire people that kind of remind you of yourself when you were young or whatever. You kind of hire people like you. And so you end up filling up your shop with people who are mini versions of you at some point. And then you realize, oh my God, that's completely the wrong strategy. You need to find people who fill in the blanks, who like compliment you and give you things that you don't have and aren't just, sort of reflections of how you think of yourself. So you have to stretch outside of yourself. And at some point when Kelley and I started talking, it was clear to me that recruiting as a woman-owned firm, white woman-owned firm, was very narrow, because we have so many schools of communications here, but the women and men that would come in tended to be white, tended to also, quite frankly, to be female. And so Kelley and I started talking about that as an aspect to our partnership, that how could Kelley be helpful in having a better pool of recruitment. And I think about this still, because it's still hard. I mean, being frank, it is still hard to on the recruitment front, to reflect our community in an honest and open way in terms of, race and ethnicity. But Kelley and I talked about it, and I think about it when I hear Rachel Rollins speak about, how do you feel as a young person if you come in and nobody looks like you? So, it's hard. It's hard. And so Kelley and I have talked a lot about that, and it's taken a while, and over time we're getting better as a firm. But when we don't have that talent inside, Kelley can point us to talented videographers, to talented graphic artists of color. So it's been very helpful in terms of widening our reach as we grow organically to be a more diverse firm in our agency. Kelley has helped us jumpstart that in important ways because of her history in collaboration. And that's been enormously helpful to me.
And yeah, there really does have to be some intentionality. And also the realization that as the face of the firm changes, so to speak, the dynamic within the firm is going to change as well. And the challenge is for the senior people who are bringing people in, young, more diverse people of color, different LGBTQ and trans, all of that kind of diversity. People have to feel like they can speak truth, that particularly at this moment, that and a feeling of belonging as well. That this is a place that shares my values, that where I can express myself, where I can show up, and a place where, even though they may be difficult, we can have some courageous conversations, and that's not easy. But this moment is teaching us that we really, if we're going to move forward, we're going to have to be vulnerable and have some of those courageous conversations.
Great points. No, and it is such a moment to be vulnerable and to find spaces and sometimes create them where you have trust with the people who will inspire you, but also call you out and hold you accountable and tell you you can be doing better in whatever way. And it's clear that the two of you have built that over time, but it's not the first thing that comes up. Geri, actually, Kelley, I think you are the one who said sometimes there's drama. How do you deal with that drama?
Well, I think you have to have, as I said, some courageous conversations. And you youngins, you're not shy. As the landscape, communications landscape and the work landscape changes, and you start working with younger people, they will force you to confront issues. And if you're going to evolve, grow your business, respond to the times and the moment, then you have to have those kinds of conversations.
And
So
I
it
have
starts
to,
with self-reflection, I would think, and then listening without being defensive, and then having that conversation. Sorry, Geri.
No, and that's where I'm just going to point out that my colleague Jada has been an enormous help to me, and by extension, I think all of us at the firm,
Mm-hmm.
because you're right, young people are not shy about telling you when things don't feel right, and I'm glad for that. I know how supplicating I was when I was young to whoever was my superior and didn't feel I could say anything. I applaud when younger people feel they can, but it's not easy, because you feel like, I've gotten this old only to get beat up. I think I'm a good person. Why am I getting beat up? But it's very helpful to be open to that and have those hard discussions. And I think for us in a firm that has this collaboration with Kelley, it kind of gives me a little bit of a gut check too, where I can rely on Kelley as a peer-to-peer advisor.
Mm-hmm.
To me, almost like my personal cabinet if I were in politics, or my board of directors if I were a corporation beyond just a smaller business. But Kelley's been part of my my corporation, my board of directors, which is helpful. I think we all need that. So, and no matter what size you are, even when I was a small firm starting out, I pulled together a group of mentors and friends and hosted a dinner at that time at Lockover, which doesn't exist anymore, but I made it special nice, so very fancy, to show that I was kind of that sort of caliber. And I hosted a dinner with people that were a little bit older and wiser, and started out having that kind of board of directors. And over time, you don't feel like you need that formality anymore, but you still, I think, have to have people that you can rely upon and really be open and honest and vulnerable with, because you're not going to do that to your clients, truthfully. You're just not. You're not going to show all your warts to your clients. You don't want them to see all that. But you do want your colleagues to be able to feel like we're working on this together. It's such a cliche after COVID, we're all in this together. Well, are we really? That's when you have to put yourself to the test. Are you really in it together? And you're really in it together if you're willing to face hard conversations and have people who can tell you hard truths. And that's not been easy. I tell you, it's not been an easy year on that category, but it's been very, very good for us. And I think our relationship together, Kelley, has been so helpful in this regard.
And I think part of that is that we are friends. And again, it speaks to trust. So if I have an issue, and I've had some, I've brought them up. And if Geri has had a concern, we have had some heart-to-hearts. And I think both of us are open to the kind of honesty back and forth, along with the Denterlein team. When the George Floyd murder first occurred last year, I remember us gathering on Zoom, some of us in our pajamas, having a moment, talking about what that felt like, the anger, the trauma, where the country was at that moment. It's not just about the work, although it is about the work, but there's a context that you're working in where you have a relationship, and those feelings can sometimes feed the work in a good way, and sometimes they can feed the work in a bad way. And I think that has been really helpful for me.
And I think it's particularly important for any business that is in the what I call the marketplace of ideas. If you're working on issues, if you're working on community building, if you're working on what I would think of agents of change kind of matters, I think it's important because you have to be able to reflect what's going on around you. And you have to have those honest conversations so that you can dig deep into your soul when you're advising a client how to be. I think it's particularly important in those, and for those businesses that are more transactional, you know, selling a product. I think you still have to do it for your own internal strength and capacity to just be strong during hard times. But it's not quite as important as it is in our business to really do this almost on a daily basis. I was thinking about the partnership question last night when I was going through my mind what takeaways that I would want to leave behind. And it seems to me, when you think about approaching a partnership, Kelley and I were, even though we didn't articulate it at the time, kind of in it for the long term. You know, we felt like it would be beneficial for us. We just knew a lot about what we needed and where the world was going in terms of, you know, in Kelley's case, bench strength, to be able to be more of an integrated in the sense of, you know, marketing communications, not in the sense of race, but a more integrated firm, having strengths of capacity, and I just needing more of that, more substance of neighborhood recruitment. So we knew that each other had needs, and so we were kind of in it for the long term. But I think some partnerships evolve just for transactional reasons, and you don't have to have exactly the same ingredients. In other words, I think for us, values, liking each other, very important for long term. For shorter term relationships, maybe you're just kind of going into it thinking, I got to get this job done, and I need a partnership for a year or two. So I'm not going to worry whether I like the guy or gal. I'm going to worry about whether they have the talent that I need to get it done. It's sort of like in politics. The reason Barack Obama and Joe Biden worked well, president, vice president, I think is because they genuinely respected each other and genuinely liked each other. I think, go back in history, John Kennedy picked JFK, or picked
LBJ,
because he needed the Southern vote. He didn't particularly like him, and LBJ didn't particularly like him, but they worked, and it worked for that election. It didn't work in their presidency because, you know, LBJ was kind of shunted to the side during the presidency.
He didn't feel like he was valued.
So it was a transactional relationship, and it was really important. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't have those transactional partnerships. But
and I do. I have a few of those.
And know what you're getting and what you're not getting. So I think that it's not always one way when we give this advice about values and respect and liking each other. That's because we're in it for the long term. But you can have short-term relationships that fill in your gaps that can be really, really good.
It's an important point to make, I think. Yeah,
definitely. We have a question from our live audience from Geri. Kelley, this is for you as a sole proprietor. What other types of protections do you have for yourself when collaborating with LLCs and nonprofits other than an MOU?
Well, with the kind of work I do, you know, some of the public campaigns in particular, they're supported by taxpayers. So you cannot protect, there's no copyright on those. You know, the anti-smoking campaign, for example, the all-inclusive Boston campaign, where, you know, I'm part of a larger team that's worked on that project. I mean, that's a publicly funded campaign. So those kinds of things you cannot copyright for the most part. The MOU, you know, having a good lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer, helps in terms of proprietary information and how each partner in the strategic partnership wants to handle their intellectual property, their patents, and so forth. You need to sit down with a lawyer and go through what needs to be protected and what is shareable. I mean, that's the advice that I would give you in terms of proprietary information. You know, if you're working on a crisis, something along those lines, I think Geri can probably elaborate on that. But obviously, you know, that's proprietary information, that's confidential, that's non-disclosure, and that should also be laid out very clearly in any kind of an agreement that you have.
I think an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, is really important because I don't know what kind of business, Geri, you're in, but if your intellectual property is yours, and you don't want people to steal it, and you can't really guard against it completely. But if you have an NDA, at least you're putting a stake in the ground about the fact that whatever I'm telling you, I don't expect you to disclose it to competitors or to other people on the street, and sign that before the engagement starts. It's a little bit of a warning shot across the bow, but I'm not certain in a smaller business situation how easy it is to enforce. But when we represent crisis clients in legal situations, we always sign an NDA, and we're always asked to sign an NDA. And we want to sign an NDA because we want people to have the trust and confidence that when they tell us their information, that it's not going to be revealed.
And there's also the piece about each partner having their individual client relationships. You know, we don't share all clients, but that also factors in is when do you want to go after business together? When are you working on, you know, projects that may not necessarily involve the other partner? But I guess my point is you want to have an agreement that you won't be stealing clients. You know, I don't know what other way to put that.
I know.
But that goes back to the trust.
Well, it's a non-solicitation clause.
Right.
And you can see how that is written. And then the last point I'll make, probably, you know, driving this to a fairly well, but in terms of your proposals, when you make a proposal in the public sector, technically, if you respond to an RFP in the public sector, when it's all over, everybody can see your proposals. You have to request for the government agency to see the proposals, but that becomes a public document. In a private setting, I don't like when people share our proposals with perhaps a company that won or whatever. So I always, or not always, but I've been trying to get better at saying, this proposal is for your eyes only, please do not share. You know, you never know, but I just get so mad when I hear that somebody's sharing our work product, because a proposal often has good work product in it if you want to win the business. And then they'll share it with somebody else, and the other firm will take your strategy and, you know, go implement it. So it's not easy to guard against, but I try to remember to say, please do not share this proposal outside. This is proprietary information.
I'm glad you brought up the public nature of responding to RFPs. One of the things I did want to talk about was the absolute gap that there is in business driven towards Black and Brown owned business owners, and the hopeful change that we'll see with that acknowledgement being very public. The city of Boston did a study. BECMA has filed a lawsuit because of this study, a civil rights complaint, showing that only 1.2% of city spending had gone towards Black and Brown owned businesses. And for white women owned business, another stamp that you can get from the city, only 8.5%. So that's the landscape that the two of you are competing in. And just reactions and experiences from knowing those win numbers are very slim.
Yeah.
Well, having been a sub-consultant on the city of Boston's business disparity study under the Walsh administration, my role was to interview businesses that were white-owned, that were owned by people of color, and that were owned by women. And not only in the city of Boston because of the nature of the study. And actually, one of my fellow consultants on the project, that was a team, is part of the audience. Reggie Nunnally, I'll give him a shout out because he was very helpful to compiling the information and doing interviews and pointing us in the right direction. But it was, you know, it's a lived experience for me. You know, I've been in business for almost 30 years, and I can count on one hand, you know, the number of contracts that I've had with city and state government, for that matter. And while I appreciated the opportunity that I had to conduct the business disparity study along with a team of other consultants and working under a prime, there was some irony to doing a business disparity study. And what we what we found was not a revelation. There's a lot of frustration. There were businesses that I talked to. They were even, despite the city's efforts to promote business opportunity and to help people navigate city halls so that they would know what departments to go to for, say, certification and where to find out information about RFPs. It's from the perspective of the small business, it becomes overwhelming because you're trying to do business, you're trying to fulfill business, you're trying to find business, and if you're a sole proprietor, I mean, you can't do it all. And so what I learned in doing some of those interviews is that some of the businesses that I talked to, they were finding more opportunities in other cities and in other states outside of the city of Boston and outside of Massachusetts, for that matter, because they just got so frustrated. They went elsewhere. Now, I will say that, under the Janey administration, there has been some reorganization of procurement and business opportunities. And so we're hoping that the findings from the study will help to fuel those changes and make it easier for businesses of color, for women-owned businesses to secure opportunities.
I can only add, first of all, I applaud the administration for actually making this information transparent, because probably knew going in it wasn't going to be great.
Right.
And unless different agencies have the courage to not wait for somebody to file a Freedom of Information Act to get information, to actually make it public, because that's the first step to change. So I definitely applaud the work that was done there. I feel as though experientially, as a woman-owned business, and we are certified as a woman-owned business, I have found in state government and to some extent in city government, although we haven't pitched a lot of business there are preferred vendors that are women and minorities that go back 20 years, and they're still getting the same business over and over again. That for some reason, once you were in 20 years ago, it seemed like that was an annuity, and it's hard to break in if you haven't done it before. And so I feel like this will freshen things up and remind people that they've got to be open to newer entrepreneurs. And so, because you're right, Kelley, we just decided, well, we're not going to go after any state business anymore because it's always going to the same vendors. So it's very frustrating. And then the only thing I would add in terms of a woman-owned business, I know that in the feminist movement, culturally, it's been seen that the feminist movement was to the great advantage of white women and not BIPOC women or Latinx women. But it's not as though that has been an easy path for a small business owner like myself. I feel that there's still a lot of business that in this competitive market will go to the guys. So I still have to, we still have to keep the work on, and transparency really helps when you know the data. It really helps people wake up to it.
So to be continued.
To be continued on that one, yeah.
I want to let folks in the audience know we've got about 10 minutes left for questions. This conversation is just flying by. Thank you again both so much for this fabulous discussion. One more question from the audience. And Geri, you mentioned that you have an activist's heart, and certainly you choose clients that you align with. But what happens if and when your business goals may not align with your social justice goals? How do you navigate those waters?
Oh, well, it's tricky because we are in business, and we can't expect every business, every other corporation to feel the same way we do. And I don't wear my politics on my sleeve, although I think people come to us. I think the advantage of being a firm that's known in the marketplace as being, having a great deal of integrity, of working on issues that matter to people like healthcare, education, transportation, etc. We tend to, just by our brand, probably winnow out some people, in a sense, being who we are. Probably there's a certain group of potential clients maybe that won't come to us, and we kind of feel like, okay, that's okay. And I think, but when we're in tough situations and where a client might not be mindful of the same issues we are, say it's in a community and you're working on a development issue or something, our job is to put those on the table. Our job is to tell them, not necessarily in an aggressive way, but to remind clients that these are issues that they will be facing, whether they want to address them now or address them later. So we put it together in what our terminology is scenario analysis, where it's a way to kind of show them our values, but in a very professional form. Like if you don't listen to these, address these harder issues, this is what will happen. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's not going to be good. And then we do another scenario analysis that tries to describe how handling hard questions where they might not feel our same values, but we will let them know that it will hurt their business in a way not to address these issues. So we try to make the business case for values, not necessarily the personal case for values. We don't, even though all of us, we will have our favorite candidate for this or that, and we work for candidates, but we don't wear that on our sleeves. You know, we try to really have good relationships with all of the electeds and all, you know, walk the aisles. But we try to make the business case for good values in our work.
I would reiterate that. I think it's important to decide, you know, based on your own mission and your own business values, what kinds of projects you're going to take on and which ones you're not. But there have been some instances with some clients who shall remain nameless, where it was important for me, as Geri said, to point out what the consequences would be if they were not transparent, if they were not forthcoming, and if they did not confront a particular issue. And so understanding that, usually, you know, if the client is reasonable and you lay out that case that Geri described, the scenario, I mean, it could go this way or it could go that way, you know, which way do you want to go? Then the clients are generally understanding. But I think it also starts with you as a business person being very clear on what kinds of projects you want to take on. And I've always been very clear.
Yeah, I think I less so in terms of, I knew the categories that I wanted to be in when I started out, which are the ones I've mentioned, and crisis communications, because coming out of the newsroom, there's nothing like a good crisis that gets the adrenaline in the veins. So I love crisis. And that can take us into any industry. And often we don't know all the facts of the case, so we can't do kind of a scan on that. But I think it does force you over time. I think when I started, I said to myself, well, I'm not going to take the tobacco companies. That was, was obvious. I'm not going to do cigarettes or whatever. And over time, you kind of in your own mind, shed things in your mind just by having them come up to you. I think it's very hard when you start a business to eliminate right away, because you need to start your business. You need to kind of open your door. But I think over time, one gets a gut feeling about what to take on and what to reject.
And who to partner with. And who to partner with. We have about 5 more minutes in the discussion, and I'll end with this great question from our live audience. I'm a woman of color CEO who is looking to build partnerships. How do I find a mentor to help me navigate the topics raised today? And I will just say, Kelley and Geri, both of you have been great mentors to me in my practice as I continue to grow as a PR consultant.
Thank you, Jada. I appreciate that. I would look at some of the business organizations, of which there are many. I've obviously found BECMA to be of help. There are some interesting business relationships whose members or whose partners are members of BECMA. the Center for Women in Enterprise. You know, they're a good resource if you're looking for mentors. You know, I would hold those two. You know, one, you know, oriented toward women, obviously. You know, the other one oriented toward people of color. Those might be good prospects.
And I would add the Boston Business Journal. I have to give them a bouquet as well, because they do a mentoring Monday once a year where it's very designed to help you find a mentor. And that can be really helpful. I don't know if you're on the younger side of your career. There's an organization called Tomorrow's Women Today, and they do a good job of trying to connect younger women in business. It's not just entrepreneurs, though. It tends to be women in the professions quite broadly, but they do a good job of connecting up with mentors. And then again, on both the BBJ and the Globe the Boston Globe has gotten into the events business. Start going to events that are tailored to your industry or your interest, because you will find people there when there's a speaking opportunity during the panel that are speaking your language, so to speak. So I would look at those as well.
Fantastic. And Geri, I'm so glad you mentioned the Mentoring Monday. That's how I came to Denterlein. I walked into that room 6.5 years ago, and I had one question: do I need to know marketing to get into communications? And I met Diana Pashota, and as they say, the rest is history.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Here with the two of you.
That's wonderful, Jada. I had forgotten that. And Jada has also, I want to also mention, Jada has participated in the Boston Leads program out of the Boston Chamber of Commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of late, the Boston Chamber of Commerce is doing a better job of addressing smaller business needs. They're not there where they want to be yet at all. But I think at least they're tipping their hat to the small business community. And the one really good thing, if there's anything that's good, and that's, I say that in quotations, air quotes, about what we've gone through with the COVID pandemic, is that there's finally been a recognition of the value of small business. I've always thought that all these politicians say things about small business, but they don't really do anything. During this period of the pandemic shutdown, there has been a recognition that small business drives so much of the neighborhoods and so much of the economy. And I think we need to just keep capitalizing on that and not let people forget, when the grip of the pandemic ends, the role of small business.
Yeah. There was one more quick question about dissolving or not even beginning a partnership. I think it goes back to, what do you need from the partnership? What do you have to offer a partnership? If the partnership is no longer meeting your needs, then it's time to dissolve it. And if you think that it's not going to meet your needs, or that perhaps you don't have anything to contribute at that particular moment to the partnership, don't begin it. Date, do a lot of dating.
Well, it is that lifelong partnership. You want to make sure you have those established shared values, that you're empathetic with the other person, and that there's space for trust where you can have those honest and sometimes difficult conversations. Kelley and Geri, thank you so much for this discussion. And I want to say thank you also to Shagun. I'll reiterate his famous proverb here at the end again, because the web that is built when those spiders come together is just so strong. So stronger together. And if you are looking for more information and can join another On the Mark event, please visit BECMA.org, BECMA.org, and use #OnTheMark for all of your conversations on social media.
Thanks, everybody, for watching and for listening. Jada, Geri, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.